And, I'm at the point in my life where I understand they're probably not making me a pour over right then and there. So I will absolutely drink it. But
they're like, I have coffee, and you're like, yeah, right.
Welcome back to Reason Together, the podcast for Christians who think about stuff. I'm here today, as always, with my good friend Daniel Fox, my co-host, and we have special guest on with us, and you would, of course, remember him if you've been following our episodes. We have Ethan with us from the Take the Coffee podcast, who has invited himself back on.
What I do.
No, actually, it worked out good, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later. It worked out good because there was a subject we came across in our episode with the Take the Coffee guys, and it was almost to the end of the episode, so we didn't have time to talk about it. And Ethan says, I have thoughts on this subject. Can I invite myself back on? And we're like, yes, absolutely, you can. We're a friendly, kind of podcast. We're your friendly neighborhood podcast is what we are. So yes, you can invite yourself back on. That's where we're at.
And we were especially thankful because as we looked at the question, we thought, I have no idea what I would say on this. And when he had thoughts on that, we boom, that answers the question.
Well,
no, not really.
And I don't know yet. I may have spoke too soon because I thought you, Daniel, had some pretty established views about spiritual gifts. I may or may not be wrong about that, but I thought you had waxed eloquent one time about spiritual gifts. And when Ethan said, I've got thoughts about that, I was like, ooh, this is going to be interesting. And you were like, wait, I do?
Yeah, that's right. Because you're like, well, Daniel has some definite thoughts on that. And I was like, well, I'm looking forward to seeing what they are because I'm not sure.
Oh, boy. Oh, well, that'll be a fun one that we'll get into here in a little bit. But before we do anything else, we'd like to first thank our patrons over at patreon.com/reason together. They are the generous supporters of this podcast. We are thankful for all of you and for all that you do to help keep this show on the road.
Absolutely. Okay, so do we just want to jump into that initial question that spurred on this threesome?
Oh, no, we got to bury the lead.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Okay, got to go to something else. Yeah, and then get to the end and be like, oh, we only have 5 minutes. Sorry, no, that's not.
Yeah.
Well,
We've got
I tell you,
shorter ones, I think.
Okay, and we have a list here of questions, which unfortunately for Ethan he doesn't see or know about, so they're pretty cold on him. But and I notice about several of them, a number of them, that they are patron questions.
Yes,
which is great. Our
Why
listener
don't we do
questions
those first?
Okay. This one was just asked to me the other night, and it was basically this. I may not word it exactly as it was originally asked, but is a picky eater a poor testimony? So like if my kid is a picky eater and we go over to someone's house and they don't like that, is that a poor testimony? What's your take?
So are we defining a picky eater just as a kid who doesn't like things?
Okay, well that's where we would typically start, is saying, what do you mean by that? And so yes, by picky eater, I would say, and I would have to say the question obviously extends beyond when I'm in my home alone. If I have the choice between, bologna or ham, I'm going to choose one or the other. Okay. It's not to say that I don't dislike some things, but particularly when I'm eating someone else's food and I express that I don't like a certain food, then I demonstrate my pickiness, adult or child.
Right.
What do you think?
Yeah, I tend to think, that can be a poor testimony. It doesn't mean you're not allowed to have dislikes. But in the scenario where someone has graciously offered you something, if you can do it, you better eat it.
Yeah. Why?
I think it's an offense. I think it's an offense to someone's good graces. They've been gracious to you and worked hard. They've put in time out of their life to prepare that thing for you, and you're essentially snubbing their life.
Very good. Yes. I think it's a disrespect, personally. And like you say, it's refusing a gift. which
Yes.
is hurtful.
Yes.
Which minimizes what that thing is and what was invested into making it.
Right.
So you set aside the time, you had us over, you thought of a nice dish, you spent the money on the ingredients, you spent your time and put in your expertise to make this thing, and then I go, I don't like peaches.
Right.
Well, that's disrespecting all that they've put into it. It's not an immoral thing. Eat the pie.
Ethan,
Yeah.
would you drink coffee that someone has offered to you that is basically just dirt water?
Yes.
Yes.
I do it frequently.
The prevalence of dirt water in our culture.
It is.
I would too.
If it comes out of a Keurig, no offense, I've never had good coffee out of a Keurig.
No.
And usually when you go to someone's house, they're like, I have coffee. And, I'm at the point in my life where I understand they're probably not making me a pour over right then and there. So I will absolutely drink it. But
they're like, I have coffee. And you're like, yeah, right.
But I will say, I think we can take that a little too far. Food is one of you guys are hitting all of the things I'm passionate about. And I love food, and there is no amount of money that I would not spend on food. And I've eaten a lot of food, and I'm always down to try things once.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But my mom is also Asian. She's 100%. She's from Taiwan, fresh off the boat. And if you go to an Asian person's household, you're going to come across something you do not like. And it will take everything in you to eat it.
Right.
And there have been times, not recently, where I have said, I will not eat that. So I think there can be, especially, Asians have a variety of dishes, so it's not like you're stuck with one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think there's anything wrong with turning something away. I think there is a proper manner in which to turn food away. But there are, if you guys ever have the chance to eat sea cucumber, just don't do it. It's horrible. And I had, there was a sea cucumber that was fermented in soy sauce. And it was like eating a rubber tire. It was the altogether unpleasant experience. And I would never eat it again if someone offered it to me.
Right.
And I would probably explain, I have a bad experience with this. I just cannot do it.
Right. I had a similar experience with dim sum one time.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, I mean, it wasn't sea cucumber, but it was the wrappers that they put around some of those dim sum pieces. And
yeah,
a lot of people don't know that, when you think of Chinese food, most of the time what you're getting is Americanized Chinese food.
Yeah, right. Which is awesome. It's delicious.
Yeah,
it is.
That's right.
It is. But when you go to a genuine Chinese place and you get, real Chinese food, dim sum, right? They bring out these little platters and has these little pieces of things on them individually wrapped. And there was this wrapper. It looked like clear gelatin.
It's probably rice.
I think it was a rice wrapper. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But it was moist, like it had been steamed. And you could see, it was translucent. You could see the stuff inside it.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt like I was eating a Tide Pod. And
that was a challenge just recently. All the teenagers were doing it. So
yeah. It wasn't good. It wasn't good. And I think it was more mental because of how it looked. But one thing, as you were talking, I was thinking of an instance we had with one of my sons. He just cannot eat shrimp. It's not that he's picky about it. He has tried. He cannot eat shrimp. He will spew. Okay.
Yeah.
And one time we were down at a pastor's house in Louisiana, and they served shrimp with fettuccine and Alfredo sauce.
Wow.
Yeah. Amen. Yes. Yeah. Amen. And I'm all about that. I'm all in. But my one son just doesn't do shrimp. He cannot do it. He will throw up. And like a trooper, he tried.
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
He tried. And I was proud of him that he tried. And he was trying to obey mom and dad because mom and dad told him, they've made that for you. You should eat that. But then he ended up throwing up at the pastor's house because of the shrimp. So it's like, at what point do you say, okay, he's not being a picky eater. That's not a bad testimony. There's just something in his gagger that cannot handle shrimp.
Yeah.
And he has a violent, retching physical response to it. How far do you go with this?
Yeah, it's that's probably a food allergy. He's probably allergic to it.
No, it wasn't. It's really not. And shrimp allergies are usually iodine related, to where people will get some mild, either like an extreme anaphylaxis, or some people get like a mild allergic response, like hives or something like that. But it's just that something about the texture, and he says it's all in the texture of shrimp. Just when you bite down on it and it has that initial rubbery kind of texture, and then your teeth just punch through, and then it's just he just cannot handle the texture. Yeah, how far do you go?
Yeah, I'd definitely be like, please don't eat that.
Well, yeah, I think going back to something that Ethan said, that if it's not that you're rejecting the main dish as a whole, if there's multiple things, you're going through the table, there's 6 things there and you choose 5. Well, that's not a big deal. You know what I mean? But if somebody makes, and so if it's shrimp and you pick the shrimp off the fettuccine and you eat the fettuccine, you can probably slip it over to the guy next to you and he'll eat it just fine. I've been in scenarios like that. Yeah, you drop it like, oops, I'm sorry, I dropped all of my shrimp on the floor. I'm sorry. Oops. No, don't lie. But I mean, but if they make
more,
yeah. But if they make spaghetti, I don't like spaghetti, or something. I seemed like some main component or an entire dish, do you have, especially if you have to ask for something else, do you have something else? Because my child doesn't eat cheese. Okay. And then it just seems, so I'm sure, I guess go back to your question. Is there a line? Yeah, I would imagine that there is a line and there is a gracious sort of workaround in some situations, but I think a lot of kids are getting too picky.
What about with someone like me? I do not eat sugar. Unless it's in a natural form, like fruit or honey. But I don't eat sugar. And it's not because I have some health problem. I'm not diabetic or something like that. I just don't want to become that way. And I feel better when I don't have sugar. So I don't eat sugar ever. So if someone offers me a piece of, like you mentioned earlier, was a peach pie or something, is it okay for me to turn that down and still be a good testimony?
Absolutely. I think.
Yeah.
I'm going to flip the question. I feel like this is the host's problem, because before anybody comes to my house for dinner, I'm asking them and communicating with them. Do you have any food allergies? Is there anything you don't want or just don't like? Like, I think it's up to the host, and perhaps they have the spiritual gift of hospitality, and you should be able to communicate with them, say, hey, what do you want? Like, you're coming to my house for dinner. I'm not going to serve you a raw octopus because that's something that I enjoy. I'm gonna check out and be like, hey, is there anything you're allergic? First of all, food allergies are all over.
Right. Yeah, they're becoming more of an issue. Yeah.
Dairy free, gluten free, whatever free. I'm gonna ask, like, hey, brother, like, I heard you don't eat sugar. Where's your line on that? If I were to make something and I added, would you prefer I used honey instead of processed sugar or whatever? That should be on the host to figure that out. And if there's no way to communicate, there should be options. Like, hey, here's a couple different things that I've worked through so that, you can have different options if, I was unable to get a hold of them.
Right. There's an interesting. Go ahead.
Even in that scenario, personally, I would say that refusing a dessert is different than something in the main meal, because almost everything. I mean, not almost everything, but there are a lot of recipes, even main dishes, that have sugar in them. So if they hand out, if they bring out the meatloaf and you're like, does that have sugar in it? Yeah, it has a couple tablespoons of sugar in it. I'm sorry, I don't do sugar. I would just eat the meatloaf and say, I don't eat sugar. I don't prefer to eat, I don't want to go that way. I wouldn't even bring up the discussion. I would just eat it. Because it's not an allergy thing. It's not it's not a conscience thing. It's simply a health thing. And I understand that. And sometimes, you have to sacrifice some of that, I would think, sitting in front of somebody. But when they offer you a sugar dish for dessert after you've eaten the meal, say, oh goodness, wow, I'm satisfied. Thanks so much. You know what I mean? That there would be a line there that you don't have to be, just because you're not being picky doesn't mean you don't have a pick over anything.
Yeah.
Like you have to take literally everything in front of you.
I have been over here racking my brain as we're talking, because I'm almost certain that there is a passage of scripture about this, about food being set before you. Okay. And not refusing it, not turning it away. And I can't hear it in my head. I can't think of where it might be. Maybe we can put that to our listeners if you know where that reference is, or if I'm just completely delusional here and making up, something out of the book of Hezekiah. Let me know.
Okay. Yeah.
There is no book of Hezekiah for the less.
I want to throw out 1 Corinthians I'm pretty sure when it's talking about meat offered to idols.
Is it there?
And I believe it's like, don't ask where it came from. I could totally be wrong, and I could totally be twisting scripture to fit my viewpoint.
Sure.
So.
All right, listeners, help us out on that.
Okay, there it is. 1 Corinthians 10:27. If any of them that believe not bid you to a feast, and ye be disposed to go, whatsoever is set before you, eat, asking no question for conscience sake.
There you go. Discussion over.
Boom.
Next. No, seriously, next.
Please.
Right. We've got other listener questions here. This one is also from, or not, I guess the first one wasn't from anonymous necessarily, but this one is from an anonymous listener who asks, with Matthew 5:28 involved here. He says, hello, thank you for your work on this podcast. Jesus said in Matthew 5:28, he that looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. Proverbs 5:19 makes it quite clear that after marriage, a man is encouraged to look at his wife in a sexual way. Here's the hypothetical question. If I'm looking through old pictures and I see an immodest picture of my wife from before we got married, is it bad if I look at it? This has not happened. I'm just wondering. Thanks.
Chirp, chirp, chirp.
we're all like smiling at each other. I'm just going to go with it. Just look at the picture. It's fine.
That's right. If the question is it wrong for me to look at the picture? The short answer, no. No. Not at all.
No. Ex post facto, it is your wife. It is fine.
Right. You're not right. Yeah, we could dive into that a little bit, but it's just like, are you lusting after some other woman? No, it's your wife. Still your and wife. You know her more intimately than that picture. So, what's the problem?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Boom.
That was pretty
done.
straightforward.
Next.
Let's see here. I don't know if I want to deal yet with the personhood one.
Okay.
So that would take us to the lead,
if we wanted to deal with the personhood one here, I could essentially just read my response to this listener, because we're kind of backlogged several episodes here, and I wanted to give this listener a response because I figured he could kind of use it right away rather than have to wait till we come out with another episode.
Well, and plus I wanted to kind of formulate a response too, but I can at least kind of just see what comes right now and then think about it more.
Okay. All right.
Go ahead.
Do you want to read the question and then I'll read my response?
Sure. He says, Daniel Thomas, as always, I enjoy your podcast due to the sensitivity. Okay. Yeah. Says, with the recent anti-abortion bill being passed in Texas, I've been seeing some shots fired, quote unquote, among Christians on social media. Nothing new there, but I was a little surprised to see it happening over the abortion issue. Apparently, some Christians don't believe the Bible leads a person to a pro-life position, which, let me just stop right there and go. I can't. Anyway, apparently some Christians don't believe the Bible leads a person to a pro-life position. It's led me to this question. Does the Bible definitively teach the personhood of the baby in the womb? Recently, my wife was listening to a video of a woman who was saved, came out of the abortion industry. I believe that this woman was a doctor. Her eyes were opened when she realized that the Nazis whom her father fought in World War II had justified their mass murder by taking away personhood from the Jews, much like the abortionists of modern times have denied personhood to the baby in the womb. So does the Bible clearly teach this? I've watched Christians on social media deny the merits of the usual verses, such as Jeremiah 1:5, etc., which is what before you were born, I knew you, I called you, something like that. Explaining it away as applicable only to Jeremiah and God's call on his life. I believe the Bible is clear on this issue, but I want to do some further study for myself because I think if the personhood of the developing child can be biblically proven, it cuts to the chase on this issue.
Yes.
So there's the anonymous question there, or wanted to remain anonymous, regarding, let's see, go back to does the Bible definitively teach the personhood of the baby in the womb?
Yes. And that does really cut to the quick with the question, because I don't think really anyone debates that it is a life in the womb. It's just that those who are pro-abortion debate the personhood of that life. Is it a human person? And if we can prove, at least to Christians who would be kind of waffling on the issue, if we can prove that the Bible does teach personhood in the womb, discussion over. So here's my response to our anonymous listener. Good question. We'll have to tackle that soon. But we are backlogged a few episodes, so I'll offer my 2 cents now. As to Jeremiah's personhood in the womb, for them to suggest that the verse is only about his call is to miss the words thee and thou that are used of him in the womb. Who was being called in the womb? Jeremiah was. It was him. This infers continuity of identity from before birth to after birth.
Can I interrupt you just a second?
Yes.
So what you're saying for those listening, I guess, just to kind of say, what you're highlighting is not just that God said, I knew you, but that it's that I knew you. And it was the same you that was born after that was present prior to birth. It's the same
Correct.
you. So it's the same person. Okay.
Yes. And this is something I call continuity of identity.
Yes.
And I wrote here, continuity of identity from before birth to after birth is the proof of personhood. I don't understand how they can dismiss that. The same could be said of David in Psalm 51:5. The tiny word I there is majorly important. Not only does he refer to what was in his mother's womb as himself, he even noted that his sin nature was already present then. According to Romans 5, only human persons have a sin nature, again proving personhood of the unborn. The Bible refers to pregnant women as with child, quote unquote. I'd say that makes the Bible's take on personhood pretty succinct. In Exodus 21:22 through 25, killing the unborn was a capital crime, the same as murdering an adult, again implying the unborn are human persons. Runners-up include Psalm 127 and verse 3. In Hebrew parallel fashion there, it refers to the fruit of the womb as children. Galatians 1:15, Paul notes that that the being that was in his mother's womb was he himself. Again, continuity of identity. Same for John the Baptist in Luke 1, verse 15. The psalmist in Psalm 139, verses 13 through 16. And Job in Job 3, verses 2 through 3. This is all continuity of identity from conception, through the womb, through birth, and into adulthood. Mary and Elizabeth were said to be with child at the moment of conception. The Bible's repeated use of continuity of identity makes personhood of the unborn undeniable. These references are definitive enough for me. If these don't satisfy the Christian who denies the personhood of the unborn, I think something else is wrong. Hope that helps for now.
I would say that with his looking for the issue of personhood is where you might run into a little trouble, just from something that I read, that because the battle's being taken to personhood because that's more malleable as a term. And this may segue into our next question, but saying, well, personhood maybe implies a personality, and that's not until it's further developed because an embryo doesn't have a personality or whatever. So we can kind of stuff the term person with meaning that can help one side or the other, where if we just say it's a human being, that's what that thing is. It's a human being, that God created mankind as a human, and it reproduces after its kind. And so at conception, another one of the same is created. It's a human being. But to call it a person and to try to find the personhood in there, some of what you're saying, I can't remember the one passage, it's talking about children or, fruit of the womb or whatever, but still they're going to define, well, personhood means that, and then they'll argue on that. Where if you just say, well, if it's not a human being, what is it? Mm-hmm. And as Matt Walsh, who defends, pro-life very well, I feel like, I'm probably saying some of what he said, if it's not a human being, what is it? And if it's not human, then why is there any agony over the decision whatsoever? But it's because of that conscience that this is a life. What kind of life is it? Well, it has to be human life. So to me, partly the logic and the science tie into it so much. But yes, it's built on the biblical concept that the Creator God created humans, and He created them uniquely in creation, with a body and a soul, and that they reproduce after their kind, just like everything else does. So if you can say, well, obviously that's the reproduction. Sure. And so if it's a human reproducing, well, what's it reproducing? It's reproducing a human. Yeah. So, I mean, I agree with you on the continuity of identity that is present prior to, but I think when we put the term person to it, that's maybe where, and it's not that we're using it wrongly per se, but that might open the door to further debate in how you define person. Like, well, it's a human, yeah, but right. Well, it's not a person yet.
Then it's just a debate of terms, at which point I think the argument is different. The question is basically, does the Bible present the personhood of the unborn in the most sensible, logical, basic understanding of what a human person is? The answer to that is yes.
Yeah, again, you're going to have to define your term person, but I mean, you're just saying, but I think the continuity of identity, what you said was a good point, is to say the same Jeremiah that was alive at 30 years old was the same Jeremiah that was pre-birth.
Right. Well, I mean, don't forget, too, our listener is writing within the context of Christians debating the personhood of the unborn, which Christians tend to have, of course, the view that a human person is a living soul, like how Adam was. In the beginning, God breathed into him the breath of life and man became a living soul. We would argue that a human person is a living soul, which, then the Christian would have to debate, well, when is the soul imparted to the conceived being, right? And where did it come from? And that's an entirely different discussion, is what I mean. So.
You mean that the discussion on like the soul is a separate discussion, or what?
Yeah, I think it's a separate discussion. In fact, if God finished creation on day 6, then is the soul of a human being created in them in the womb, in a sense, a new creation? Or was that material, that soul-ish material, I guess you couldn't call it material properly, where did that come from? And different theologians take different views, essentially saying all of the souls of all mankind was bound up in Adam at the beginning. And I don't know that I have a view of that necessarily. But, that's another discussion. And I don't know that we want to crack open that can.
Okay. Okay. Well, good. So we slide that one over. Thank you, Anonymous number 2, for that question. I love talking about life and defending life from the mass murder in our culture. Mm-hmm. All right. Do we want to jump into our lead here?
Yes.
All right. Let's see here. This was a while back. Somebody said, to me, one of the difficult aspects of personality classification for Christians is when we start to mix spiritual gifts into the equation. I would be interested to hear your take on this. Are personality and a person's spiritual gift related, or two totally independent things, or are they the same thing? Good question, Nathan.
All right, Ethan.
They're totally independent. Because
totally, okay.
If they were tied together, I'd like to refer to your Enneagram episode, which in my mind is one of my favorites, because I run into that more than probably anything else.
Really?
Teenagers love it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's kind of up there with like a horoscope in the newspaper now. Like this type of, are you all these letters and numbers? I'm like,
right.
I don't know. But one of the points you guys brought up is personality changes. And you can change your personality. If you looked at me in high school, you would say I have a totally different personality. Personality, as we call it, can change after salvation. You know, if someone lives a certain life, you say, oh, they're, that kind of person. Salvation can change that. Spiritual gifts only refer to post salvation. I don't know how far you want to get into this, but like I said, I'm really passionate about this.
No, that's an interesting thought.
And I think they have to be totally independent, because I've seen, let's take the gift of evangelism. I've seen people use, and when I say evangelism, I mean like sharing the gospel, sharing the word of God, people with totally different personalities.
Yeah.
Both exercising that gift to, in a manner that I would say is like, wow, that appears to be their gift. That is something that it looks like, God has, given them a special gift in that way. And I think we can get in trouble if we start tying spiritual gifts to personality types. And we end up either forcing a personality on somebody or forcing a spiritual gift on someone that they may not have. And that's point. I hate, I might get canceled for this. I hate spiritual gift tests. I hate spiritual gift tests. Like I hate the Enneagram. Like I don't need this quiz to tell me what gift I have. Like to me, that's for people who don't exercise their gift or try to do anything at all.
And
or
I definitely
or people who just like doing things that are about themselves. It can be an exercise in self-aggrandizement.
Yeah. What flower am I like in my personality?
Yeah.
What Star Trek character
am I?
Disney
princess.
Yeah. I could definitely see where people would mistakenly connect certain personality traits to what they perceive to be certain gifts. For instance, like you say, the gift of maybe prophecy, or the gift of, somebody who is more of an evangelist. Oh, that's always the type A, aggressive, confrontational. So if you're a type A, boom, you're a prophet, right? Or you're very likely a prophet. No. And so I agree with you on that. I think you make a good point that you, in essence, always have personality as a person. Even back into the womb. No, I'm kidding. You always have personality, but if a spiritual gift is given to you by the Holy Spirit as a believer, then obviously it has to come later, and thus it's unique, it's different.
Right.
And yet they're parallel in one way. But go ahead and Tom, you go ahead.
No, I was thinking it's almost like they can't be related to personality, which is to some degree innate. Some aspects of personality, I think, are innate, and the whole debate of nature versus nurture can maybe come in there if people really wanted to. But we're in 1 Corinthians 12, which I think is one of the premier passages on spiritual gifts. At the very end of the passage, he says, "But covet earnestly the best gifts," right? Which would almost imply it's something that maybe you could develop if you desired to exercise a certain gift in a certain way, that you could develop it like a skill. You could covet after it. You could want it in a way. Am I wrong?
I would give a different angle on that verse. It's interesting in that 1 Corinthians 12:31 when he says, "But covet." In the original, the Greek word can either be, it's the exact same form of word, can either be the imperative or the present tense. And I personally take it as the present tense. And what he's saying is, you covet earnestly the best gifts. He's making a statement of fact, not a command. He's saying, here's what you guys do, and yet I show you a more excellent way. You guys are looking at all the best gifts and going, I want that one, I want that one, I want that one. Mm-hmm. And now it still may go to your point, but I don't think he's commanding them, you guys ought to covet the best gifts. No, instead he's saying, this is what you do. You covet the best gifts, but I'm going to show you a better way. Does that make sense?
So you think there's more cause to interpret it as a statement of fact as opposed to an imperative, and you think that comes right out of the grammar?
It is certainly consistent with it. The same form could be either imperative or present in that particular instance. I mean, the same form of the word.
I see.
So it wouldn't be spelled any differently.
So what, you just basically have to pick which form of it you want?
No, I would say
I'm being a little facetious there.
Yeah, but what's most consistent, I think. Okay. And speaking of their attitude throughout, they were obviously carnal and wanting, kind of self-serving in the thing. So it's very consistent that they would be choosing obviously what would be best for them and what they perceive would be the best.
I see.
He's making the contrast that you do this, and yet I'll show you this.
Okay. Yep. That makes sense. That makes sense.
Okay. But it doesn't necessarily negate the point that you're saying. It appears that they were pursuing certain gifts. And yet he makes the point just one verse earlier, have all the gifts of healing, do all speak with tongues, do all interpret. The implied answer, and again, I believe this is in the grammar itself, the assumed answer is no, they don't. That's the way it was designed. So it's in some ways, it's almost like they couldn't be. If the Holy Spirit didn't make all apostles or give all the gifts of healing, if he didn't give all the gift of tongues, then they can't. You follow? It's not like I can say, well, the Holy Spirit didn't give it to me, but I'm going to pursue it and get it anyway.
Right.
No, because it's a gift of the Spirit. And he gives to every man severally as he will, as he desires.
But that's not to say that people can't work outside of their spiritual gift.
Yes, and that was going to good. I was going to bring that back around to say what, and a friend introduced this thought to me here a few months back. But what is, and maybe he didn't say it exactly like this, but what is the point of a spiritual gift?
I would say, just kind of off the top of my head, is to serve others, to minister.
Okay.
In the body.
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe it's your relationship to other believers in the body, and just because we are a body, different members have different functions.
Yeah.
And God is intelligent and, designed our bodies to function in different ways. And he designed the church body to function in different ways.
Right.
And the hands and the fingers will do something different from the feet. And he has equipped those members to do those things.
If I could throw in maybe somewhat of a,
before you do, can I finish that thought out?
Oh yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, so if yes, it is to interact with the body, but let's say in the gift of teaching, if I have the gift of teaching, and I believe I do, what does that mean then that only I should teach because I have the gift of teaching, or does my gift not only serve to serve the body, but also to serve as an example to everyone else of how to teach better? So that they, though may not have the gift of teaching, if you will, can teach better, because that's something that they should be doing anyway. They should be influencing other people and communicating their faith and truth. Right. And now seeing the person with the gift, take it another way, the person with the gift of mercy or the gift of giving, they not only do that ministry, but they also teach us how to do it by being an example. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that we're then growing in all of these areas as we see people who are gifted, to where it becomes a little less apparent what our gift is, because we're becoming better teachers and better givers and better merciers and better prophets.
Sure, getting better, all of them. And that's kind of what my oddball question was going to be, is essentially, if the highest aspiration of the Christian in practicality is to be like Jesus, what was Jesus' spiritual gift? All of them.
Yeah. Yep. And that is why I despise spiritual gift tests, because they get their answer. They're like, I have the gift of, helps. I'm a helper, and I will not do anything else.
Right.
Yeah.
And they
use it as a limiter.
Yeah, they're stuck in this rut of, oh, I'm sorry, that's not my spiritual gift. And I've literally heard those words.
Wow.
And then you go back to, what's the difference between being a Christian and obeying God and your spiritual gift? Because you say, I'm really just not an evangelist, so I will no longer share the gospel because that's clearly not my spiritual gift.
Yeah.
It's like, well, no, that's still a command in the Bible. You still have to do that. And that is something you can work on. If you had asked me 10 years ago, I would have said, I had never knocked a door until college because the church I grew up in just didn't do it. Mm-hmm. And man, I was bad at it. But over years of knocking doors, you learn how to communicate, you learn how to talk, you learn, to look at different people's personalities and, work with their personality to share the gospel. And I could easily have said, not my gift. I can't do this. So I'm gonna go back to being a helper.
And God was gracious enough to give people gifts to give us examples of how to do that thing better that we're all supposed to be doing anyway. Now, even with personality, so I think there's a distinction there that we're saying spiritually we should be trying to grow into the mature, complete, whole man. That which would mean that we exercise different functions and capabilities in a mature way, even if it's not our gift. With personality, that may not ever be the case where nobody can tell what our personality is, because you're just sort of like nebulous. You're just like everything, right? Well, no, I don't know. I don't know that it's quite. What do you think? I don't think it's quite as divisible that way. To say it's still going to be more apparent, and that's not a bad thing, what your personality is, that you just sort of perceive things a certain way, and your responses mirror that. Or do you think it's going to become harder and harder to tell a mature Christian's personality?
That's an interesting thought. I kind of would say the latter, off the top of my head, that as someone matures, it might be harder to tell what personality type they are, maybe. Because, they are, in a sense, if someone's not a Barnabas encourager, son of consolation type, they're more of a Paul, more of a straight up kind of, mission oriented, get the job done type mentality. If they're learning to be a Barnabas also, you might see them doing both of those things and wonder which they are. It might become less apparent.
Well, maybe we'll leave that to our listener and say, can personality change? But again, I think it seems obvious to us that personality and spiritual gifts are two different things. And yet I think they're parallel in that the same God who made your personality and gave you and upon salvation gives you a spiritual gift. And as you develop and mature and grow, the liabilities of your personality should lessen. In other words, well, I'm just a hot-tempered guy, so that's, well, no. You should be growing spiritually, which should affect your personality. And at the same time, you should be growing spiritually, which will affect your outworking of things that aren't even your gift. So there is a parallel, because the same God gave you all of it to create a whole person that's equipped to every good work.
Well, and you kind of sparked something else I was thinking recently about Moses, because you think about his personality was, in a sense, useful to the Spirit of God, but also useful to his flesh if he used it wrong. Because you see this very strong character who was willing to literally not fear the king of Egypt. Very strong
like
character.
Killing somebody and burying him in the sand.
Right. But at the same time, he loses his temper with the children of Israel and disobeys the Lord and so on, with the exact same temperament, if that makes sense. It's just, and I think it could be a similar scenario for the Christian today, that if the Spirit of God is in control of your temperament, he can use that temperament for good things. But if you let your flesh get a hold of that temperament, bad things happen.
Yes.
And yet it's the same temperament.
Interesting. I was gonna throw this to Ethan. As far as how people probably pigeonhole personalities to spiritual gifts, and you think about Moses, and then you think of the boardroom, where you're supposed to be brash and stomp on people and show them that you can hold your own and blah blah blah. You can be the leader of this corporation, and then Moses is the meekest man. He controls his strength more than anybody. Like, well, I don't know that I would exactly pick. I mean, I guess what you're saying, Thomas, he was a strong man.
Yes.
And
but
yet
he learned to be under control after a point.
Yes. Yeah.
But I actually preached through essentially like a spiritual gift type thing through the life of Moses. And I was like, can you imagine being Moses and going around and be like, hey guys, I turned all of the water in Egypt into blood. And like, hey guys, I split the Red Sea. Have you ever seen something like that before? Like, that was me. And, like, his personality could have had like the biggest head in the world, and nobody could say anything about it. He's like, I led a couple million people who really didn't want to come with me through a wilderness. Like, I watched food rain from heaven to feed them. But I was like, whatever his spiritual gift was in like leadership or whatever, I was like, there still is a measure of a ton of other things he had to do. Clearly his gift wasn't administration, because his father-in-law had to come up to him and say, hey, you're burning yourself out. You're hanging on to too much. And I was like, he had shortfalls, he had issues, he had problems. But one of the things that I really try to focus on, and my pastor just preached a message on it, is making sure God has your strengths. He says a lot of times we like to give God our weaknesses. Like, I'm really weak in this area, help me. But we hang on to our strengths and we say, I'm good at this. I got this, God. Don't worry about it. And Moses could have hung on to those things and said, yeah, I think he kind of did when he hit the rock instead of speaking to it. That was his strength. I've done this before. I can hit this rock and water will come out. And he hadn't given that up to God. But, we could go look at Moses's life and say, he could have walked away at this point. He could have said, I'm staying in the desert with my wife, tending my father-in-law's sheep. He's like, I imagine that was a fairly comfortable life for him. Going back to Egypt was going to be uncomfortable. Leading the children of Israel through the wilderness, that was going to be uncomfortable. But he chose to exercise his spiritual gift. He didn't keep it to himself and say, I'm staying out here. He exercised it. He used it. He worked it. Regardless of his personality, he's like, I have a stutter, I can't speak. And, God helped him through all those things, all of his personality excuses, until Moses came to the realization of, God's given me a job to do, and I'm going to exercise my gift to accomplish that goal.
Amen.
Good. Well, I think that's a great note to finish on.
I was thinking the
today.
same thing.
Yes.
Tied up, put a bow on it.
Yep. We want to, again, thank our patrons, especially thank all of those that are listening, and hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and know that we always like to hear your feedback. Maybe it's a question that you've got. Maybe it's a thought regarding something that we talked about today. You have a different take on it, or maybe something we left out, or whatever it is. reasontogetherpodcast@gmail.com. We want to hear from you. That would be great. We dealt with largely today listener questions, and we'd like to deal with more. So reasontogetherpodcast@gmail.com.
Well, thank you again for being with us on this episode. And thank you to Ethan from the Take the Coffee podcast. You want to just really plug that one more time real quick? I know you did last time.
Yeah, that's the whole reason I invited myself back on, was just in case I didn't hit that last. No, I'm a friend of mine, Pastor TJ, and we host the Take the Coffee podcast. We interview missionaries, pastors, people serving the Lord, using their spiritual gifts in a variety of different ways, whether in full-time ministry or not. And we get their perspectives on ministry, things that they've done in their life. And also we like to focus on advice that's changed their life and kind of what got them to where they are. So we have really good casual conversations, kind of like this podcast, really focused on encouraging people to go into ministry or be a participant in their local church. You could find us at Take the Coffee You can find us at Take the Coffee Podcast on both Facebook and Instagram if you're interested in checking us out, or you can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts.
All right. Well, thank you for being with us, Ethan. And thank you, dear listener, for joining us again. We are encouraging balance, developing perspective, and connecting faith to practice. This is Reason Together.